6:02, and all the commissioners we're expecting this evening are here. So why don't we begin with a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Witherspoon,
Here.
Mr. Goldstein. It's a yes. Miss Wells,
Here.
Mr. Cantor, Mr. Rowena,
Here.
Mr. Johnson,
Here.
and Mr. Schulman.
Here.
Okay, quorum.
All right. Our agenda this evening is going to be two public hearings, which will combine into a single hearing, which we will close without action because we're still awaiting a report from the redevelopment agency. But there are two matters. The first, 5-20 SPR, Wall Street Recap Associates LLC, Municipal Holdings, Second Garden Development Limited Partnership, 61 Wall Street, also known as Wall Street Place Phase 1, complete construction of an existing 6-story frame structure as a mixed-use building with 101 dwelling units and 10,000 square feet of retail. And B, 6-20 SPR, Wall Street Recap Associates, Municipal Holdings LLC, Second Garden Development Limited Partnership, 17 Isaac Street, also known as Wall Street Place, Phase 1, construction of new 4-story building with 2 upper residential stories to include 50 units above parking garage levels with 152 plus or minus parking spaces. With that, I will, since it's a public hearing, I'll remind those who are here from the public who wish to speak that the process is the developer will, in this case, provide only a brief update on the project, since we had a fairly complete presentation previously. We'll then ask our consultant to comment, and at any time throughout that process, commissioners are willing and encouraged to chime in with any questions or comments they have regarding the project. Once that portion is completed, we'll open it up to the public for public comment. Those folks who have spoken before, if they comment at all, are limited only to the any new materials that may be discussed this evening. And once those comments are completed, and again, people will have only one opportunity, the public will have, members of the public will have only one opportunity to speak. So I encourage you to include everything you wish to say in your comments. Following that, the developer has the opportunity for rebuttal. I'd remind anyone from the public who is going to speak that your remarks should be addressed to the developer and not to the commission. This is not a conversation you're holding with the commission, but with the developers themselves. We are here to listen so that we have all the information we need to take action. But again, I will remind you this evening, we will be closing the hearing without action while we await a report from the redevelopment agency, which we're expecting in January. And we'll probably have this matter on one of our January agendas for formal action. And with that, I'll call on the representative for the developer, Attorney Hennessy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, perfect. Well, for the record, I'm William Hennessy, and we're happy to be here at these continued, at this hearing for these combined applications tonight.
Attorney Hennessy, I'm sorry, would you tell us which law firm you
Sure. I'm with the firm of Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy, and I practice out of the Stamford office at 707 Summer Street here in Stamford.
Thank
And
you.
for the record, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll just recap what happened at our last session of this hearing. When we convened on December 9th, there was a problem that was discovered during the hearing process. And it involved the difficulty with members of the public logging in. So we had taken a recess essentially, and you and your fellow commissioners took a conservative approach, and we think it was the correct approach, to continue the hearing again to tonight and allow sufficient time for a renotice of the hearing. So that renotice occurred. Your staff put it in the newspaper. We placed several large signs on the building, all in compliance with Governor Lamont's executive order on notice, and the requisite affidavits of sign have been submitted for the record. So I wanted to make that clear. I will be brief tonight. We are anxious to complete this hearing. Since our last official hearing where we substantially traded information, our efforts have yielded, I think, very good results. Mr. Weisbrod, our architect from Crossley Architects, has been working with Mr. Griswold's, your peer review consultants. There's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of trading of information and ideas, updating of our plans, all of which have been submitted in an updated fashion. I'm given to understand Mr. Griswold has submitted a peer review report to you folks, and I'm guessing that he's going to present that and take questions from you as you just indicated it. And I think that's the chief part of our presentation tonight. And I think it would be helpful and useful for Mr. Weisbrod to walk you through thematically the changes that occurred, giving you an overview, maybe not every minute detail, but certainly if you'd like every minute detail, I'm sure he's prepared to do it. But I think we all be better served by him describing the themes that were discussed and the results achieved. And we feel that we have a terrific building that when it's built, everybody's going to be proud of. But before he does that, I do want to take care of some housekeeping issues. And first of all, I want to note that our entire development team is here tonight, with the exception of Queasy Brown from Malone and McBroom. He is our traffic engineer, and as I indicated the last time we were here, Mr. Yosik from the city has indicated that the traffic report submitted was accurate, and based on that, there is no proposed mitigation. So we gave Mr. Brown the night off, and with the idea that his presence wasn't required. Your staff has confirmed that they didn't see any reason for him to be here, but everybody else is here. And then the other housekeeping thing I want to point out is when I reported to you in mid-November that we had received all of our municipal SEAC responses, there was one missing that I pointed out, and that was the flow meter analysis for the WPCA pipe. I mentioned this on the 9th. I'll mention it here again for this record, that the flow analysis showed very little volume in the pipe and very great amounts of capacity remaining in the pipes. And we've gotten a confirmation of that capacity from WPCA. What we didn't have on the 9th, we do have now in your record is the official letter from the WPCA. All of their conditions and remarks and comments contained therein are acceptable to us. The other thing we've received and is in the record for this matter is a will serve letter from Eversource having to do with the gas for both buildings. And there is also correspondence and sketches of the electrical service that involves Eversource in your file. So I point all that out because I think when I just go through the box, checking boxes of items that we are responsible on a site plan application to have investigated and satisfactorily provided, I think we've checked all the boxes. And I think the chief thing we're down to now is the architecture. So without further ado, I'll ask Mr. Weisbrod to take the screen. I do want to point one thing out. When he's done, Todd McClutchy will address you briefly. Since the last time we were here, some neighbors of ours at the adjoining condominium have expressed some interest in the area between the buildings and on Isaac Street. And Mr. McClutchy and Mr. Weisbrod have been dealing with those neighbors, meeting with them, exploring ideas, and we think we have a nice addition to the project that they will explain. So without further ado, I'll ask Michael to take the screen.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. For the record, my name is Mike Weisbrod and I'm with Krosky Architects in Hartford. I'm going to start the screen share here. Everyone see the screen with the rendering?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. So the last time we met formally, which was, I believe, back in November, I walked you through some updates based on the project working with Mr. Chris Watts. I'll be doing the same tonight. I also plan to be fairly brief, as Attorney Hennessy was. I'm going to break up the updates into a few groups. First, I'm going to talk about updates to the North Building, 61 Wall Street. Next, I'll go through a few updates for the East Building, 17 Isaacs. And lastly, I'm going to conclude with a few updates that are non-peer review related. There were a handful of small refinements that were not pertaining to the peer review process. And as Attorney Hennessy mentioned, I plan to really focus on the substantive changes tonight. There are a handful of other small changes, in most cases just clarifications or better graphics demonstrating what we've already included in the design. I can go through these in detail if the commission would like. Just let me know at the end if that's the case. But again, I plan to focus on the bigger changes here. So I'll start with the North Building, start by talking through a few of the site changes. The site changes were fairly minimal, and I guess I will call them refinements here. We did move some benches around. There were a few benches located at the entrance of the building here that we felt through discussions with Bob maybe should not be placed there, giving him more direct access to the building. We've provided space for public trash receptacles. We've spaced them out throughout the block. You see one here. Another little update we've made is adding an external bike rack, actually two of them by the southern entry of the North Building, in addition to the bike racks we have on the interior of the building. So in terms of site changes for the North Building, that's more or less it. I will go through a separate discussion on some site changes for the East Building, but I'll just confine it to the North Building for now. Talk about the outside of the building now. These are the elevations. So one of the things we were working with Bob on was trying to add more ground floor transparency to the project. We did achieve that. We expanded the width of the storefront bays as well as added a couple. So I'll briefly walk you through what we did. Starting with Wall Street, we widened the storefront bays as much as we could, given the placement of the columns here. We added some side lights on either side of the two main entry doors of the lobby. Again, all of these storefront bays are a little wider. Carrying down the north leg of Isaac Street, these storefront bays are also wider now. And concluding with the third street elevation, which is the south leg of Isaac's, again, we did widen these storefront bays a bit. And this little retail space off of the rear lobby, we actually added a couple of storefront openings. So, we agree that these changes are going to benefit the project, bring in more vibrancy to the streetscape. And the changes I walk you through show one option in terms of storefront design. I'll go back to the primary elevation on Wall Street. You'll see that we are proposing some intermediate vertical mullions in the larger storefront openings between the masonry here. We think that's a good addition to the project because it kind of breaks down these larger glazing panels to be more reflective of the doors and to create a nice sense of rhythm on the street. One of the requests from Bob was to do a study what the storefronts would look like without those intermediate mullions, which I'll show now here. And I really just think it comes down to a personal preference here. I kind of like actually, I really prefer the one I just showed you over this one. I think, while this does provide minimal additional glass, it gives the appearance that the top floors are floating a bit over the masonry base and not as supported as much. But again, it is a personal preference. Both of these options are included in the updated package, and I will leave it at that. Another change that we ended up making after discussions with Bob was adding some windows. This is the west elevation. So Wall Street would be to our left here. So this is the elevation that's facing the adjacent buildings on Wall Street. So the bank building would be just in the foreground here. The previous design did not have any windows in this location. So one of Bob's thoughts was to add some windows here to help alleviate the blankness of this wall. We think that's a good change. We couldn't do it everywhere because of the layout. There were some bathrooms in the middle here, but we think these windows are a good addition. The other change I'll hit on briefly are the windows themselves for the project. As I discussed the last time we met formally back in November, we are treating the Wall Street corner and facade a little bit differently given its prominence to the project and adjacency to the historic building. So there's some special treatments going on that I discussed last time I won't talk about again, but the one thing I will mention is that these windows, if you recall, have a 4/1 muntin pattern, kind of giving them a little bit more prominence. And prior to the drawings that you see before you tonight, the rest of the windows did not have any muntin. So through some discussion with Bob, we ended up adding some mullions to the other windows on the project. So whereas before they were just single panes of glass on the upper story, now they have a horizontal muntin to break down the glass. And we think this is a good change. It helps break down the glass on the upper stories and helps relate to the mullions on the storefront below. I think that more or less does it for the north building. I'll move on to the east building now.
Before you move on, I just want to make sure I'm following. The east building where the art panels are, or is that removed in the north building?
The east building is 17 Isaac Street. We still have hardy panels on part of the building. We're looking at the facade right now, which is predominantly brick.
On the first level, where there was originally the art installation. Is that still okay?
Yes, we absolutely still have these displays here.
The boxes.
Yep. So one of the changes that we made on this building through discussions with Bob was a material change. Whoops. If you recall last time, the lower couple levels were all precast concrete, given that the program of the lower floors is parking garage. But one of Bob's thoughts was to better tie in the relationship of the architecture between the upper floors and the lower floors, was to extend the brick down to start to, again, tie the vocabulary together. So we've done that in 3 locations on the building. And again, we think this is a great addition to the project. So we've done that just above the main entry on the corner here. We've done it again over the central part of the main facade facing Isaac Street. And we've also done it on the other side of the building on the other stair tower facing Commerce Street. So again, that brick is just extending down and kind of linking the upper and lower massings together a little bit more strongly. One other change I'll mention briefly, actually this pertains to both buildings, but before we were proposing two separate brick materials. One more traditional brick, which had a red rose color on Wall Street, and a more modern style brick, slightly different color and texture on the rear of the 61 Wall Street building and 17 Isaacs building. One of the things we did change was just having one brick style for the entire project, thereby making the material palette a little bit more streamlined and cohesive. So we are using the nicer red rose brick on the entire project where we had brick before. We're not changing the brick areas, it's just a material change, brick A for brick B, if you will. And again, that's for both buildings. Let's see, there are one other two changes to the east building that we made. I'm going to zoom into our bottom rendering here, which is taken from Commerce Street. If you recall, last time we discussed this little pocket park addition to the back to kind of increase the pedestrian experience on Commerce Street. We have since then included more landscaping on these two sides of the building, kind of extending the greenery from the pocket park around the building through discussions with Bob. And we think this is a nice addition and will help benefit the streetscape experience on Commerce Street as well. And the last little change I'll discuss on 17 Isaacs is another small material change. If you recall, these metal roofs were a light blue color the last time you saw this. We have since changed this to a gray fish scale, which matches the fish scale siding on the upper story of 61 Wall Street. So again, we're trying to make that material palette a little bit more streamlined and cohesive. And we think this will help tie in the vocabulary of the buildings together. So that is, more or less the substantive changes, as I mentioned, that occurred during the peer review process. I'd like to just briefly take a quick tangent and discuss two other non-related peer review changes. One is a Sightline study. No changes here. It's more of a study, but I believe there was a comment from the public some time ago about some concern that the mass of the 6-story portion of the building would negatively impact the streetscape experience on Wall Street with the smaller historic buildings. So what we did, we actually went out there and we took some photographs from the opposite side of Wall Street, where the views to the building would be greatest. And we superimposed our model, our 3-dimensional model of the building onto the photographs, as you see here. So you'll see this is the edge of the building on, as you'd see from Wall Street. This is a little alley between our building and the bank building. And if you look closely enough, just peeking through the alley, you can just barely catch a glimpse of the 6th story of the building. So I think the Sightline study was worthwhile because it does demonstrate that the 6-story mass will not negatively impact the Wall Street pedestrian experience, and you're only going to catch ever so much of a small glimpse of this as you pass between the buildings. As you can see, although these buildings are much shorter in height, based on the angle of view, they more than conceal this building from Wall Street. So again, walking down, you'll just barely catch a glimpse of this as you walk down Wall Street. And again, based on the angle of view, you just catch a little glimpse of this beyond the fly tower of the theater. So
how imposing would you feel it would look like on Isaac Street relative to what's there today?
Pardon? I didn't quite hear that.
How imposing, or how do you, I see the sight lines done from Wall Street. If you're looking from Isaac, would you get a similar experience, or would it feel more?
Well, the angle of view from Isaac Street would be sharper because you're much closer to the 6-story mass versus farther away. So you would experience it greater, but given that we have a 4-story building here, we have another 4-story building here of the Phoenix, the relationship of 4 to 6 stories we don't feel would be as drastic as the smaller buildings on Wall Street.
Thank you.
Good question. And the last thing I'll talk about tonight, which Attorney Hennessy mentioned, was some recent discussions with the condo association at the Phoenix building, 19 Isaac Street. I'll kind of walk through some plan changes of the space between the building and then show a rendering of how this would look. And this is a pretty recent development. We've been talking with them over the last few days about how to make this space feel a little bit more open. So our plan before included a little door into our building with a sidewalk. We've since done away with that door. We're now utilizing just the front of the building for access. And what that allowed us to do is a couple of things. One, it allowed us to eliminate our own side entry, which required us to match up the floor lines, which required us keeping the retaining wall that is here on the property line. So by the ability to eliminate that retaining wall, we are now able to really treat this space between the buildings as one volume, even though the space does occur on 2 parcels. The thought was to create one volume between the 2 buildings and more or less double the usable space. So that being the driving factor here, we were able to accomplish that. We also are providing some additional improvements. Currently, there's a little, I'll call it alcove in the flagstone walk at the Phoenix building. We're creating a little sitting area just adjacent to their front entry here with some benches. As you'll see in the rendering in a minute, we have some baller type lighting adjacent to the edge of the walkway. We're planting some grass and some additional landscaping against the building here. We're adding a new wrought iron gate up front to provide a sense of entry to this space, as well as another gate to the back of the area where they have their parking lot just to the south here. So I'll conclude this with a rendering of that space. This is taken from just beyond the front entry of the building, as you see here. So again, this flagstone walk exists right now. There's a little triangular shaped planter and retaining wall that would come down, thereby allowing us to really, like I said, double the amount of usable space here. The little sitting area just adjacent to the building entry. We've added some planters against the building to replace the landscaping that would essentially just move again to create more usable space. Another thing we've done here is to provide some architectural interest to this side of the building. Previously, this was just a blank wall, but we've added some recessed panels to the precast structure in the same fashion we've done on the rear stair tower to, again, provide some visual interest and just have not so much of a blank wall, if you will. So we've had discussions with the neighborhood, the condo association as recent as last night, and seem to be appreciative of this. I'll let Todd talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but we think this addition to the project will benefit not only their parcel, but ours as well. We think this is a pretty good change. So as I mentioned, as I started out, there are some smaller updates. I'll call them refinements. I won't go over them unless you'd like me to, but I'm certainly willing to. But just to give you a flavor in terms of what those other things are, just so you're in case you're curious, there are things like updating graphics on our floor plans to show which areas are calculated for open space and public realm. We're not changing anything. We're just clarifying what is counted where. We're noting the size of the block of the masonry on the base of the building. We are noting the benches as powder coated finish. You get the idea. These are really not substantive changes, and none of those will really change what you've seen or heard tonight. So I hope these updates were helpful. And before I turn it over to Todd, I must say that I think this peer review process has made a great project an excellent one. So thank you, Bob, for the time and effort you put into this, which I know was a lot. We really appreciate it. So that concludes my presentation. Once again, we can come back if there are any questions or if you'd like me to present anything in detail. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Todd McClutchy of JHM.
Thanks,
Any
Mike, for that
questions
update.
from commissioners? Okay, Mr. McClutchy.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again this evening, and Mike for going through the updates that we have presented for this new revised proposal here. So a few nights ago, we had some calls from some of the neighbors at 19 Isaac, which is the Phoenix condominium. We had spoken to them back in August, and they were looking for some updates as to the status of the project, what the development proposal currently looks like, which we quickly set up a Zoom call with them to go through some of those changes and listen to some of their ideas for how we could better enhance the aesthetics as well as the sort of user experience along Isaac Street and Wall Street. And I think we came up with some very good ideas. Mike ran through some ideas of how to create some more open space and create a more inviting entrance for the Phoenix building that is between 17 and 19. So I think we've had some very good and interesting conversations with the condo board members as well as at 19 Isaac, and we're making very good headway of keeping them updated so we can get a new development in the area, and so there could be some more economic development there. And I know we have some of them on the phone this evening, and I'm not sure if they're going to speak or not, but we can, listen to anything further they may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Pardon me. Bob, if you could run through your report, but briefly. We've all seen copies of it. I think all that we require, all the public probably requires at this point, is just a brief explanation of what you've done and what you're thinking about the project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Robert Griswold's DeCarlo and Dahl Architects. Brian, can you pull up my report? I have to apologize. For some reason, I can't log into my office. Okay, and can we go to, let's see, go to page 6, which should be, right there. It's actually 5. Okay, so I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of some things, first of which does not necessarily affect this project, but it's an interesting thing for you to read at your leisure, perhaps, if this can be read at leisure. And that is the development direction that's liable to occur in this neighborhood. And you have extremes from the parking lot here at 23 Isaacs, which is large enough to develop, as the little sketch back from 2008 suggested, into a very significant size project. So there's some parts of this neighborhood that are clearly going to develop at some point, or let's put it this way, the economic pressures and the physical possibilities of the site will allow development. And you contrast that, and let's go back to page, I guess it's page 1. Okay, I guess it's page 2 then. Okay, which on this site, just to the northeast of Wall Street Place North, there are a series of small properties, not the ones on Wall, but right, those 5 properties on Isaacs. Yes, just below, right, those 5 there, which just don't quite have enough area to build a large enough building on. And what's going to be limiting the ability to build on it is the ability to lay out parking in any significant quantity. So ultimately, parking is going to determine and how large a building can be, and how many properties you can assemble, and what their geometry is, will determine how much parking you can get in. If you remember at 9 Leonard, that was severely constrained by parking, and ultimately you just couldn't get any more than what they proposed on the site, which was 4 stories. So that's just something, doesn't affect this project, but as you think about this neighborhood, it's interesting to see that sort of analysis. Go to page 30.
Bob, what's the takeaway of that?
I think the takeaway is just in thinking about where your zoning and design guidelines, they set an upper limit, and some properties will get fully developed, all other things being equal, to the 5 stories or the 6 stories, the 4 stories with the step back, the 5 stories with the step back. Other properties are not, it will be possible to develop. So you're going to get, there isn't a profound message from this, but the neighborhood, unlike say down by Waypoint, you're not going to get a big cohesive block in this neighborhood because the properties are just too diverse to permit that, if that makes sense. Go to page 13, I believe. In analyzing this, we went through, there you go. Even though Wall Street Place North is a pre-existing building approved previously, we did take a look to see to what extent it conformed to the new zoning, and to see if there were any ways that it would be possible to make the building more conforming. And as far as yards and planning go, it pretty much conformed. It conformed on Wall Street. It conformed on Isaac's Northeast. On Isaac's Southeast, it had a broader sidewalk area than is what the neighborhood plan is desiring. And so we did make a suggestion, which ultimately was not accepted, but just to that we're pushing this all the time, of 2 areas where it might be possible to add onto Wall Street Place North to reduce the sidewalk area and create some more interest on the sidewalk, perhaps larger retail areas. So not everything gets accepted, but it's nice to know that we're trying, or hopefully you'll like that. If you go to page, I think 17. Okay, there. The next thing is parking. We did have worked with the applicant doing very detailed analysis of how you get the most retail and restaurant space with the given parking that you have, and that's what is that proposed there. And basically what happens is, for a given amount of spaces, it really determines how much restaurant space you can have, because restaurant uses far more spaces than any other use. So this is saying that a 5,000 square foot roughly gross area is what the parking permits for restaurant space as an initial occupancy for the building.
Does that not align with what the applicant's proposing?
No, that
isn't.
No, they are proposing that. I don't believe it's on the, and I hesitate to say this, I don't believe it's on the site plan application. It's on a chart that I was given today, was dated earlier in December. But the total is right.
Okay.
And so
I just couldn't tell if you were saying like there wasn't enough or there was too much. I just wanted to.
No, the total is right, but from that total, that's how much restaurant is the maximum restaurant that you can get as initial occupancy, which is probably about what the project would merit anyhow. If we can go to page 23, I believe. spent, okay, right. Okay, spent a good deal of time, and I don't believe this one is resolved. And we'll go to the, on the, no, I think actually that's fine. Stay there for just a second. Depending, looking at the light levels on the sidewalk in particular, generally you want about 1.5 to 2 foot candles, which is a measure of the amount of light on the sidewalk. And let's see. So the upper plan here is showing numbers roughly 2, I believe, on Isaac Street. I'm going to point to it. It wouldn't make any difference. And tapering off at the corner. So there are a couple things that we observed, and that's that there are several areas that were underlit as of these plans and needed to be addressed a little more specifically. And that also, depending on whether you used the 12-foot pedestrian fixture, which you have seen in other redevelopment areas and other projects. Leonard had them, Clark's had them, One Chestnut had them. That gives you light on the sidewalk as opposed to the 24-foot high fixture that hangs over the curb line slightly, 3, 4 feet, 5 feet. That gives you light on the roadway, but doesn't give you light on the sidewalk. So I think there needs to be, we're recommending that there needs to be more study of this. And if we go to the below this, when you have a chance to look at it, you'll see that the light levels are different. The lower one is the roadway, and you don't get the light levels that you get with the pedestrian on the sidewalk. And go to the next page, please. I'm sorry. To get the, where you have a problem is on Wall Street, where you want to throw light into a wider street and at the same time have the pedestrian light. Talking to the manufacturer and the manufacturer's representatives for the city's standard light fixtures, which is Spring City Electrical, they typically can make a fixture like this, which is not a city standard fixture yet, but it's sort of a combination of the 2 city standards, which is what we would recommend being considered for Wall Street here. Okay, now let's go to page 26, I believe. Okay, question was asked before, good question about, and Michael's studies about what you can see of the 6-story portion of the project, because the 6-story portion is the portion that was approved before, but you wouldn't be able to get it now. But in fact, if you look at it, all of Wall Street, which is not much, but most of Isaac's Northeast, and that's the upper thing, 68% of that elevation is 5-story, and was 5-story at the previous approved project. And then if you go to Isaac's Southeast, there's about 30% that's 5-story, visually 5-story. There's a 6-story piece behind, but you won't be able to see it from the street. So the gist is that this project, even though it's taller than you would approve now, really in many ways gives the feeling of what a building that would conform to all the current requirements. It's not that different. I think that's what I'm trying to say. That's just something, again, to keep in mind, because the massing has been a contentious issue. Let's go to page 31. Okay, transparency. This project worked out, as Mike had mentioned, about making it transparent. The key here is that one of the few places in the design guidelines that there actually is a numerical requirement, like zoning has numerical requirements, is on transparency. And the guidelines say a minimum of 75% of the street frontage transparent. Now, I think it's useful just to let you know what we, as your consultants, think the standard should be. And we worked this back and forth with Mike and his whole team. First question is, or first point is that probably should only be for retail, restaurant, commercial frontage. where you don't have commercial frontage, and you'll have this at Pinnacle, it doesn't make sense. So it seems like if you've got commercial frontage, that's where it should apply and only there. So that's the way it was applied to this project. And then the second thing is that it makes sense that within that you average for the whole area. You don't try to say each piece must individually conform, but so long as the overall percentage is right, then you're probably in the right place. Can you scroll down a little bit? I'm trying to remember what point 3 is. Okay, point 3 is on the next page. Okay, point 3's next thing is the little diagram there in the upper right is what what our guidelines are saying was a desired pattern, which is to say that the guidelines seem to prefer a first floor that doesn't necessarily relate to the upper floors. And that's an interesting thing. And I think that that's pretty useful, because if you look at some historical examples, and you've got 2 right here, one a very traditional building in happens to be in Manhattan, where there's more masonry, more columns, more stuff up above, and it opens up below. The second one is more typical for a small Connecticut city type of storefront, where it's the same thing. You keep the first floor open. The floors above can have their own pattern, but you don't have to have that pattern. It's not important to have that pattern below. In fact, there's good reason to say maybe that pattern shouldn't exist below. So that's the number 3. Then there's just a question of what does it mean to be transparent? And we went back and forth, and ultimately it didn't matter on Wall Street Place, but is a mullion, is a vertical member, an aluminum member, is that transparent? Well, in one sense, it's not part of the masonry. So yes, it is. But if you consider an opaque piece of aluminum transparent, would you consider translucent glass transparent? Would you consider an opaque panel within an aluminum frame transparent? You get to a point where it doesn't make any sense. And so it seems the only standard you can really use is transparent means actually you can see through it unobstructed. That's would be our recommendation to you. That's number 4. And let's see, I think there's number 5. Or maybe there isn't a number 5. No, okay. So that's just saying that, okay, that was the analysis. It made sense here without, they were able to get the 75% without going through any, without removing any mullions. I guess that's the best way of putting it. But that, as Michael said, we asked them, and scroll just a little bit down further, we asked to consider the storefront on the bottom with large show windows versus the subdivided ones which were originally proposed. And to our way of thinking, the larger show windows are what seem to be in the spirit, the intention of the design guidelines. And again, just another historical example there of big windows on the first floor, more subdivided windows up above. Where you want show windows, you make them big. That would be our recommendation to you. Let's go from there. So that's display windows. The last thing, page 36, I believe. Okay, and all of these points are we have at the end of this, we have recommendations for you of things, the commission, things to require, and then things that maybe would be nice. I think there are 8 things we would recommend you require, and then one thing, which was that entry, which would be nice if it's possible. There are currently 2 surface transformers sitting on the sidewalk behind a screen. This is something that we think is not what the urban renewal plan, not what the design guidelines intended. You'll be able to read. We went through the applicant provided information from Eversource, or communications from Eversource, saying that they thought this was probably the only solution possible. But quite frankly, I think that the urban renewal area, the neighborhood, the intent of this merits more study of this issue, and that we would recommend that the commission have somebody who is the active advocate for the neighborhood plan, the design guidelines, in a discussion with that. That if you're just going to ask an Eversource engineer, they're going to say, you know, this is the best we can do. And if you don't have somebody there advocating for you, you're probably not going to get the right thing. So I think that's about it. Okay, go to the second to the last page. Okay, so there you go. And that one doesn't have the 8, but you have 2 7s, which this is just doubly lucky. But those are those points. A couple of these points, Michael has said, and this was written before we had the last set of drawings. A couple of these may have been answered in their current submission, but those 8 points are the things that we would recommend that you include in your approval. Okay, so let's back up. Our recommendation is this is a good project. We recommend its approval, but that with these points added as conditions for the approval. And then on the next page, I believe. Okay, and then the one thing to be considered, which is the enhancing of the entry for the project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
And any
Bob.
questions, of course.
Good question. Bob, on page 36, I think it's 36, 37, you talk about sustainability, green design. Did you go back and forth with the applicant at all about any elements, or is this sort of?
No, we haven't gone back and forth. And I will have to say, I don't believe in any of the 4 projects that we've reviewed, with the exception of maybe rooftop solar. There really hasn't been anything. Some of this, so what would you see at this level? You would see something like rooftop solar or other things like that. If you had a more natural site, you might see elements of the landscape to accept stormwater runoff or things like that. With these urban sites, you're generally not going to see that. You could, I mean, there are
You are seeing, though, with construction materials and things of that nature too, though, right?
You're seeing that, but it's really general. You're gonna see much more opportunity for green design as you get into construction documents. So we've started with that, but I mean, what could you say about what's really green materials? If you were going to build from wood, okay, that would be green in one way, but it's generally not appropriate for an urban area. In fact, the reason that there aren't any buildings in this area that are older than 1850 something is there was a huge fire when it was all wood. So it's a good reason not to have wood when things are this dense. I'll give you a personal observation. If one were to be really green, one wouldn't use cement, brick, glass, or metal. That kind of limits you, but that is half of the world's carbon output.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, take that off the table and where are you? And that's about the level of information that you get at this level of submission.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any other questions for Bob?
I have one more question for the applicant, but not for Bob.
Oh, that's fine.
The question I had was, I'm trying to understand the affordability housing element of this. And I know you guys submitted on, what is it, October 23rd. Is that the most up-to-date affordability housing plan?
Can I answer that?
I'm sorry?
I was asking Todd McClutchy to address that.
The one from October 23rd. Let me check our records, but I do not think that it has changed since then. If you would like, I can quickly run through what I'm showing as the affordability bands, if that is helpful.
That'd be super helpful. I had trouble trying to, I know the affordability housing gets very technical very quickly, so I was just trying to just roughly see, okay, what sort of the range of salary, things of that nature, are we looking at here?
Gotcha. So in terms of the actual different levels we have. So there are, it is kind of confusing. There are several different levels of affordability for this development project, ranging from sort of lower income through market rate. And so we have 39 units at 40% AMI, 33 units at 60% AMI, 34 units at 80% AMI, and 45 units are market rate unrestricted units. And those numbers stood out up to 151.
And the unrestricted is still all in Isaac?
Correct.
Is that right? And what is the current AMI?
43,000.
143?
Correct.
So that, if I'm doing that right, the first one's like roughly 38% of that. So that's 53,000 is the first. So that means that first band is for individuals making 53,000 or less, roughly, give or take. Am I understanding that right?
I would say 45 to 50, yes. Depending
45 to
on
50?
the size, right? It's going to depend upon the size of the family. So
That's right. There's that variable too. It gets
Exactly.
very confusing very quickly. But that's the range of, it'd be below that rate of salary.
exactly correct. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
There's a, under the Q&A, there's a question about whether there are any areas within the developments for walking dogs.
We have not created an outdoor space for dogs. We do have that little pocket park on the backside of Isaac Street and on Commerce Street. And then we will also have a couple of other things within the building. So there will be amenity space within the building. It will likely have, we haven't gotten to this level of detail yet. It will likely have some sort of pet care grooming area for smaller dogs. And then we will also have the roof deck, which is on the podium of Wall Street North. That could potentially also be utilized, or an area that could be utilized for pets. But we have not developed quite that level of detail and amenity space yet, but I do foresee some aspect of that being included.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we open it up to the public?
Yes, I have one question. I apologize. Every time I try and unmute myself, my picture moves. But I wanted to ask a little bit of a follow-up from Nick's question. When I was reading through this report, I saw references to sustainable building, and then later on, sustainable and green building. And I just wondered, is there a difference? Are those two terms used interchangeably, or what did that mean?
So yes, those terms are sometimes used interchangeably, and just to follow up on Bob's brief discussion on this, the next step for us after approval is to get into design development and construction documents. At that point, we'll really be able to delve in deeper into what's possible. But as I think I mentioned, whether it was last time or the time before, Energy Star certification is a goal for us. Again, we still have to work through that during construction document phase, but Energy Star is more or less lead level in terms of green building. So it is above and beyond what is required in the building codes. And that is a goal for us with development.
But that mostly has to do with, as I understand it, energy savings and reduction of carbon footprint.
Right.
I guess that's for another time. I'm not clear on what
It's
the
a
sustainability aspect is.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a more robust building envelope, which reduces thermal transmission through the walls, allows you to have more efficient mechanical systems, things like that.
All right, and I had one more question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, on to our architect review, and that had to do with the transparent issue. It was good to end up seeing that the transparent means see-through, And I just wondered how significant you felt that was being impacted by the mullions.
By the way, let me just add, piggyback onto the type of thing that Michael might be getting into in terms of sustainability in the future phases of the project. When you're doing something that is meant to be green or environmentally sensitive, or a term LEED, which is within the profession and people outside the profession may not know it. One of the things you will be looking, you look at a myriad of things. Could be anything from can the occupants easily open windows to get air in? Sounds simple, but you don't always get that. To the recycled content of materials. So for example, I just said that steel and aluminum are energy hogs in terms of their production, but they may be 90 to 95% recycled material. So they may qualify as being environmentally sensitive for that reason. In any case, there's not one big thing you do. You look at every decision. And okay, I'm sorry. Now, okay, cool. Transparency. The intermediate mullions only made a few percent. I don't remember. It was maybe 6%. It's actually, I believe I put it in the calculation there. Difference in whether they would deduct a small percentage, but a small percentage when you're really stretching things could be enough to whether you make 75% or not. On Pinnacle, right now it's a bigger deal because they have thicker mullions, so it can be there. What I would suggest, and I'm not sure about, I hesitate to do this, but I would say that you probably are better off making decision on those intermediates based on the aesthetics than on the numericals. And if at some project the numericals didn't quite work with the amount of mullions that seemed to be right, maybe you as a commission say the official standard is 75, but we'll accept 73 in this one case for this one reason. But they do make a difference. And when you're getting this close, I'll give you an example. The diagram from the guidelines, rough measuring it out, that's about 80% transparent if it's all, if there are no mullions, there are no doors, there is no anything else. If it was just glass, it'd be about 80%. If you put in all of those things, even with show windows, you're probably down to 75% or real close. So it can easily come, and I don't think you would want any more open than what those diagrams show, or it's unlikely that you would be able to get that. So it does pay to pay attention to those. I would more think you should think about it in terms of what streetscape visually you want to see. But you can imagine that conceptually it's possible to say, well, I'm going to put 2 inches of mullion every 12 inches. And that clearly is not what you want to see.
Well, thank you for answering, especially in that detail, because frankly, I'm a mullion guy. I like mullions, and you know, they don't even interfere with my eyeballs when I'm looking out my windows. So I'm happy to hear that it's an aesthetic issue mostly in this case, although I don't know why my vote on aesthetics counts, but I'll take it.
Just to clarify one thing on that, and I agree with Bob's point that it's an aesthetic issue. While the standard that's in the design guidelines talks about 75%, it doesn't give any direction on whether there's mullions or how that's calculated. It just says 75%. So I think that you have the discretion in this case, and also, you know, this gets referred to the redevelopment agency as well for comment, that, you know, you can make a determination that that standard is met by the calculation provided. And I think it to the point, it is an aesthetic issue, and it adds to the, you know, the streetscape. I think that in some sense that leave it up to the applicant if they want to break up the glass a little bit. And obviously to Bob's point, somebody may try to take advantage of that by putting in, larger mullions or breaking up the casings more. But I think what's proposed here is, in keeping with the building, it makes sense for the streetscape, and it adds a lot to the project.
Well, interestingly enough, I don't think anything that any developer I've ever seen with a project has done anything to create that situation. It's usually the tenant, putting up the lottery signs and how many winners they had and what they have for sale that creates the inability to see through a window. So maybe that's something that can go into the leases we're always talking about. So I'm done. Thank you.
Other questions? Of course, there'll be continuing opportunity to ask questions when the public has completed their comments, but anything else right now?
Mr. Chairman, if I may interject briefly, would this be an appropriate time to just provide a brief response to a few of Mr. Griswold's concerns, or would we like to hear from the public first?
I don't think it would be inappropriate for you to speak on that.
Okay. All right. I'll just quickly run through a few things that Bob touched upon. One was lighting. And as Bob mentioned, there were a couple areas of the photometric plan that did drop below 1.5 foot candles. That was actually based on a older photometric plan. I'm going to go back to a screen share here. This is a more updated photometric plan that we just received. And a couple things to point out here. One, we are using the roadway pendant that DPW has requested. Two, we have since added some building mounted light to address some of those dark areas. And really there's only one area where the photometric plan shows less than 1.5 foot candles, and that's at the corner here. And the reason is because there is an existing light here that's present and functioning that the supplier was not able to include in the calculation because they didn't exactly know what type of fixture it was. So in reality, there is more than sufficient light down the streets. As you can see, we're well above 1.5 foot candles all the way down. So we think that's addressed. I think transparency, we just had a really good discussion. I don't think there's anything for me to follow up on there. I think really the only other thing I'll mention briefly is the transformer. As Mr. Griswold mentioned, this did come from the utility company. But, given the proposed location here, it is adjacent to a loading dock. It's not necessarily parked at the front door of the building, and it is screened. It's not like it's going to be easily seen. And the sidewalk does pass in front of it. And just wanted to point that out for the commission, and I'll end with that.
Thank you. All right. Brian, as we open it up to the public, I'm going to remind you and the public as well that if you've already spoken at our previous meeting, then all you can comment on are the architectural issues that have been brought up today. And keeping that in mind, I believe we had 3 speakers last time. I think we had Attorney Wilson, Attorney Rubin, and Mr. Milligan. As a courtesy to anyone else who wishes to speak, let's let other people speak if they're interested in speaking on these architectural issues. That's fine, but let's let everyone else speak first as a way of being fair to those folks who haven't had a voice yet. With that, Brian, would you open it up and explain how people can raise their hands?
Sure. So anyone who's logged onto the Zoom meeting in the public, if you want to use the raise your hand feature, which is at the bottom of your screen if you hover over everybody's picture. And then if you're dialed in on a phone, you could hit *9 and that will raise your hand, and then I can bring you over, and then you just have to say your name and address for the record. So with that, we just have one. Assuming it's Mr. Milligan, I'll bring him over.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good evening. I happen to be at a Wall Street Neighborhood Association meeting looking at the Tyvek Temple. There's 15 of us here outside, socially distanced. And I want to commend the developer for accommodating the owners at the Phoenix. It came to our attention that they just realized about this project and that they reached out to zoning and the developer, and they accommodated them. They moved it back and met some of their concerns, which I thought was a good thing. And that went a long way to actually meeting some of the community needs. We felt like this project was getting slammed down everyone's throat, and that actually changed a lot of people's opinion that they were working with the community. So I want to commend the McClutchies and whoever else met on that meeting. That was good. And I also wanted to just mention that I own 5 Isaac and I'm buying 11 Isaac very soon. I heard Bob talk about those properties can't get turned into muds. They're limited by parking. And I own several others that I have ideas for that I think could work. But my biggest concern is that this is still 6 stories and it's only allowed to be 4, maybe 5 with a bonus. And I will be appealing this, unfortunately. However, there's also a petition out there looking for mediation. Everybody who's on zoning, everybody who's listening, you should look for mediation because there's a lot of issues to resolve and nothing's going to happen with all this litigation. They're not going to get tax credits. They're not going to build, they're not going to build anything.
Mr. Milligan,
Good talking to you, buddy.
this is outside of our wheelhouse. These issues don't really play a role in our reaching a decision on this project.
And to unmute, you hit *6.
Am I still talking?
Yes, you are.
All right. All I'm saying is, I realize it's outside of your purview, but you're a Norwalk citizen. This has been a big problem. There's 5 lawsuits down here. It's not going to resolve itself. The scheduled trial date for the one lawsuit, the first lawsuit, is February 2022. There are 4 other lawsuits, and I'm starting a new one as soon as you approve this. We're not getting out of this mess unless we get around a table together. And there's lots of things we can resolve together. I don't hate the McClutchies. I hate a lot of things they do. I hate this project in a lot of ways, but I also see that this project can benefit the area. And if they're working with the community like they just did with the Phoenix, great. We can find a way to work together. But come on, we're all people. Let's get to the table, push Mario to the side. Let's go to mediation. Let's find a way to make things happen, because this would be a benefit to the neighborhood. No doubt. Of course I can see that, but you can't have one forearm on my throat and the neighborhood's throat and then shove it down with this project. So I'd like to see this project happen as much as everyone else. Approve it tonight, great, but encourage mediation and let's resolve all this stuff at the same time. So thank you for letting me talk again. I won't take more of your time. And I'm not alone, by the way. There's 14 other people here tonight, and there's 1,500 people that signed a petition asking for mediation.
Thank you. Brian, have you anyone else who wishes to speak?
So no one yet. If anyone would like to speak, you could use the raise your hand feature or dial *9. I think that's it, Lou.
Okay. Mr. Hennessy?
I will be very brief and begin by thanking you all for the time and attention you've given to this project. I'd like to make one thing perfectly clear for the record. Shortly after these applications were filed in August, Todd McClutchie reached out to folks at the Phoenix, and we he held, there was no lawyers in attendance, a meeting with the condominium folks, with the condominium owners, to discuss the project. So to the extent that the last speaker inferred that people were in the dark and people didn't know about it, they've not only been noticed as per law, but voluntarily before any formal notices were sent out, before we ever appeared before you. Those conversations were had. And I think the board members ought to know that. There's been one property owner who's been vocal. He's brought his lawyers here, but I don't believe we've heard from anybody else an objection to 2 buildings going up here. And I think that's a testament to the fact that they're quality buildings and they're welcomed by the community. You know, Mr. Chairman, I was thinking here while I've been sitting, I don't know that I've ever been, perhaps some of you have, associated with a project that is this unusual. I mean, we have a situation here where a building has been sitting unfinished and exposed to the element for several years. My guess is it's about 60% done, maybe more, maybe less, but it's not an attractive thing. It was designed by others, and it has as a central feature a completely useless robotic parking situation. There was until the 17 Isaac building was acquired, no parking solution for this. The developer was bankrupt. The property, after a year or so, it devolved down to a lender, which still holds title. If I gave you this scenario, you'd probably say, well, any solution is probably good enough, even if it's a marginal project. We've got to figure a way out of this mess, and it's a mess. But what you have in front of you is not a marginal product. You have a great product. You have a great building that's been worked on, frankly, by 2 talented architects over the last several months to take it, as Michael described to you, as a really good project into an excellent building. And that's what you have before you now. And I think that is the testament to a lot of hard work, including hard work of your staff. We are proud to present this building. I'm sure my clients will be prouder the day folks moved in, and you should join them in that pride. But from a legal point of view, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, this is a site plan review, a CAM review, and as well as I do, that the law provides that if we comply with zoning, and we believe we comply with each and every requirement of the zoning regulations, then we're entitled to an approval. And I think we not only comply with those, but we exceed them. We exceed them in terms of the design and the public amenities that are provided with this product. And I respectfully ask that you consider that as you deliberate on this going forward. We genuinely look forward to seeing this product come out of the ground, be finished, and for people to live here and for people to enjoy this section of town again, because it will, as we all, I think, recognize, it will be the linchpin of other high quality development in this area. So that's all I have to say in closing. If you do have any other questions, we're all here to answer.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the commission members? All right, hearing none, I'm going to close the hearing pending report from the redevelopment agency, which we're expecting early in January. Once we've had an opportunity to review that report, we'll take a full and proper vote on this matter. Now, every time we've heard this, we've had to hold, although we've tried to combine them, 2 separate hearings. I'd like to find a way where we can combine this and our final action into a single action, which can be addressed with the approval. Steve, suggestions on how we do that?
I think for good housekeeping, I think it would be good to vote on each matter separately. I imagine that the resolutions for both applications will be very similar. So it's not really much more work on anybody's part to put that together. You know, there's some different variations because they're two properties and two different buildings, but I think that wouldn't create any extra work, at least on staff's end.
Okay. Okay. Then there really is no other business to come before us this evening except for adjournment, unless, Steve, you have an update of any sort that you wish to share with us.
No, the other thing I was going to say, I don't, and I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Chairman, if you want to point me in one direction or another in terms of what you're thinking for a resolution. That would be the only other item I would add.
Specifically, what are you referring to?
Well, if you're thinking more on the affirmative regarding the application, then we would, you know, start working on that resolution and put our effort into that.
Well, I think in any case, we can sort of do a straw poll, but I think in any case, that is the resolution that is going to require more effort. It's easy enough to turn down a project. Yeah, I'd like maybe some brief feedback. I'm not we're not voting this evening, but are we as a group more inclined to go forward with the project, or at this point more inclined to reject the project? Nick?
I'm more inclined to go forward with it.
Okay.
The affordability aspect is, I think, really important to the area. I get the height, but I also seen what, you know, we have on record for that. So I'd go probably lean more forward than not.
Galen, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, same for me. I
Okay.
inclined to.
Richard?
I agree with what Mr. Hennessy had to say, that a lot of us might think anything would be better than what was there. But I think it's a fantastic job that was done between the two architects. I just can't get over how our peer review architect and the project architect have cooperated. I was trying to think of how I would do that if I was a lawyer working with another lawyer, and I can't. But very impressive. Thank you both.
Josh?
I absolutely second everything Dick just said. This seems to be a really impressive development. And yeah, I mean, obviously, once we hear from the redevelopment agency, hopefully this will pass through our committee.
Okay. Michael?
I'm in support of the project. I mean, it's a well thought out project. And as you can see, a lot of time has been invested. And
Okay.
I think it would do the city and the area very well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, clearly, this is not a vote. This is our impression. At this point in time, we have yet to review what the redevelopment agency has to say. But Steve, I think you have what you're looking for going forward.
Okay, understood.
Okay. Then all that remains is a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Okay, Richard moves that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We've got 2 seconds.
Give it to Galen. Give it to
Mr.
Galen.
Goldstein and Ms. Wells.
Give it to Galen.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Merry Christmas to everyone. Happy and healthy and just overall better New Year for all of us.
To you all.
Yep.
Hey,
Happy
Lou.
holidays.